Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast presented by Exo Mountain Gear. This podcast and the gear that we produce at Exo Mountain Gear share the same purpose: to make you a more capable, confident, and successful backcountry hunter. Straight to the point, no fluff, and no BS. This show is all about providing you with valuable information from experienced hunters. To learn more about the podcast or about our backcountry hunting packs, please visit exomountaingear.com. Well, welcome everybody to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. You're in for a treat with this episode. Our guest is Corey Jacobsen. Corey has been hunting elk for over 30 years and is a absolutely treasure chest of knowledge. In this episode with Corey, we break down a few specific scenarios that you guys should be interested in. Number one, if you are new to elk hunting, whether you've never gone on a hunt or you are brand new, maybe have gone on a first hunt, we talk with Corey about the specific things you should focus on. Two, if you're new to elk hunting, maybe you've hunted 1 to 5 years, maybe struggled to kill an elk, maybe have killed one elk or two, we talk about you and for your scenario, what should you focus on? And then finally, if you're in this third category, where you've been hunting a handful of years, maybe killed a handful of elk, but want to be more consistent and find a better quality of animals, Corey has some specific advice for you as well. So no matter where you're at along your elk hunting journey, this episode is sure to help you out. We also speak with Corey about the University of Elk Hunting online course. You guys may remember that we discussed this course last year. Well, Corey's back to tell us about some updates to the course, expanded content, new offerings, even better ways to soak up the vast amount of knowledge that Corey has shared in this course, as well as the other resources that he's brought in. So there's amazing content in terms of video and written chapters. It's a self-paced online course that every elk hunter is sure to find value from. As you'll hear in this episode, we have an exclusive discount just for you guys. If you use the coupon code BACKCOUNTRY, you will save $10 when you register for the University of Elk Hunting online course. Again, you'll hear more about that in this episode, as well as an elk call that Corey is developing and so much more. All right, before we get to the show, I want to give a shout out to Casey Richmond. He left us a review on iTunes, and for doing that, Casey, we want to send you some Exo Mountain Gear swag, so please contact us by email to podcast@exomountaingear.com, and we will get that stuff headed your way. Listeners, if you want to be entered into these giveaways, it's really simple. Just leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever else you might be listening to this, or go ahead and contact us by email again to podcast@exomountaingear.com with any questions, comments, or feedback that you have. Okay, let's dive into this episode with Corey Jacobsen of elk101.com. Corey, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, I should say. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, what's up, man?
Not much, man. It's just ready to learn from Corey here.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all? Corey, we really are excited to have you back. I was thinking I knew it had been a little bit, but I was thinking it was more recent. But man, I think it's like episode 11 that you were on. So I'm excited for our listeners to get back now that we're many, many more episodes into this, and hear from you and hear, of course, about elk hunting, and we'll get into that. You know, so many times we spend time introducing a guest and things like that. I hope that for the vast majority of our listeners, they need no introduction to the one and only Corey Jacobsen. But go ahead and give us just like a 2-minute, for the stragglers who aren't aware, introduction.
A 2-minute? Man. How about a 2-second?
Highlight reel. All right, 2 seconds good with me.
No, I'm grateful for you guys having me back on, and I love talking elk hunting, and I think we all do. We're passionate elk hunters. I've just been blessed with a platform to be able to really make it my livelihood and be able to share my passion for elk hunting with others. So, we do that through the website elk101.com. And recently, I can't believe it's been that long ago since I was on either. It seems like we were just chatting, but when we launched the online course, of course, Mark, you helped me out with some of the content in there, and I'm just excited to share, like you, any information and passion and excitement and experience and lessons learned and all that about elk hunting with anybody who's willing to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of excitement and lessons learned, two things you mentioned there, tie that into this past fall, the 2016 season for you. I know you got to get on some elk for sure, but kind of give us some highlights, maybe some lowlights or lessons learned or anything that kind of sticks out from the 2016 season.
You bet. Sorry, I was just taking a drink there. Because this one's going to be a long story.
Let's hear it.
No, 2016 was an awesome year. We had an opportunity to work on a really big project that's still ongoing, and we're hoping to launch it mid to late July. But I was fortunate to be a part of 7 successful elk hunts in a 30-day period. Jeez. Which I say fortunate because the fortunate part was being able to experience. The unfortunate part was having to pack all 7 of the elk in a 30-day period, which we put the Exo Pack to the test and to good use. And it still looks like new. I was hoping I'd wear it out so I could have a justification to get a new one, but it still looks new. So. But no, we started out with our normal just Elk 101 group, Dirk and Donnie and I, who we hunt together every year as much as possible, and hunted in grizzly bear country for the first time. I mean, I've hunted a couple years ago in grizzly country in Montana. Didn't really have any. We definitely saw sign. We definitely were into them, but it wasn't the heart pounding at night, walking out on the trail every night with flashlights and pistols drawn type of a grizzly bear hunt or a grizzly experience, which this last year was. We actually had 5 grizzly bears on one hillside at one time fighting over Donnie's elk carcass. Fortunately, we had already got it packed out, but they were back on there within hours, and it was intense and insane. And for anybody who's hunted grizzly country, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't hunted grizzly country, that anticipation that you feel is real, but when you actually see them and they're fighting and growling and it sounds like a 4-stroke motorcycle right next to you, it was pretty intense, pretty awesome.
I got my caribou hunt this year. That's the first time I'm going to have an encounter with grizzlies, and I'm definitely a little nervous about that. Fortunately, we were hunting early. I would not want to go back there during rifle season when there's gut piles everywhere, because that's their dinner bell. We hunted early and we killed 3 elk and got in and got out. Once we killed an elk, we completely relocated and didn't even go back into that area after seeing what really goes on. We were seeing tracks and sign, but it wasn't like, man, there's bears everywhere. But to kill an elk and then 24 hours later to have 5 of them on the same hillside really highlighted and illustrated just how thick they are in there and how careful you really need to be. So anyway, that kind of was a sidetrack. That was an incredible hunt, though. We hunted early, the 1st to the 10th of September, and we just timed it right. The bulls weren't herded up at all. Honestly, outside of 2 big groups of elk that we saw, I don't know if we saw any other cows on that hunt. It was all solo bulls that were staged, that hadn't herded up yet. They were very vocal, very aggressive. And we had just an insane amount of good fortune being able to call in elk. And anytime you go to a new area, public land, general type tag, there's always that uncertainty and that apprehension. But it was good enough that we're going back again this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that was 3, and that was for the Elk 101 crew. Where did you kind of move on to from there? Yeah,
so from there I came back and recouped for 4 or 5 days, and then flew to New Mexico and met up with my good friend Randy Newberg. And we had drawn New Mexico tags, and I'd never been there before. Randy had, and he talked about how great the unit was and how excited he was to get the Pied Piper of elk calling down there and call in elk, and just really making this great big deal out of calling elk. And I ended up spotting and stalking an elk on the last day in 85-degree heat and 20-mile-an-hour winds, because we could not call in an elk down there. Fortunately, it worked out, and I shot a nice 6-point literally with 2 hours of daylight left in our hunt. But it was 4 hours on my back and belly and barefoot, slipping in basically in the grasslands. It was just wide open. This bull was bedded under the only clump of brush for miles, and got the wind good and got in there and slipped in and managed to make it work out. But that's one of those things I kept telling them, all you got to do is find one elk that wants to play. And we could not find one elk that wanted to play with the bugles. So
what do you attribute that to?
I don't know, Steve. It was, everything. It was a bad year. It was a perfect storm for all the elements that go against elk calling, especially in that environment down in the desert type units. We had a full moon. We were hunting literally right during the heart of the full moon, and it was hot, 85 degrees. There were people everywhere. You can't camp on state land down there. So there's one little section of BLM, and there were literally 80 plus camps on that little patch, accessing 4 different units. So everyone was concentrated. So we'd take off every morning, and there were 12 or 15 ATVs in front of us going up the bumpy 2-track road to get back into the area. And I think the elk, that's a lot of pressure. We ended up finding I looked at the map and said, I want the patch of land that is farthest from any road. And it was about 6.5 miles back into this area. And we got in there, and it was great. I mean, the elk were rutting, and we got into some bugling action and got set up. And here come 2 guys that obviously had the same idea. And pretty soon here come 2 more guys, and they walked in on the downwind side of the elk, and we watched the elk run out across the flats onto the next section of private, and they holed up right there and stayed there the next 3 days. So I think there was a lot of pressure, the heat, the full moon, and it seemed like the rut was a little bit later last year, probably a combination of all of those elements, but it was definitely the hardest hunt I've been on as far as a bugle hunt.
Wow. After a few days of that, like experiencing that and just being around that many people, that has to get discouraging. I mean, there's nothing you can do. You just got to keep hunting, but just the mindset of staying in it, especially when, like you said, Corey, you try to get away from everything, but you're still running into guys. That's tough.
Yeah, we covered on GPS 87 miles in 7 days. And you think New Mexico, it's not overly steep, but I'll tell you what, it was brutal. Those rocks down there, you're jumping from rock to rock all day, and just hip flexors and ankles and everything. It took a toll for sure. And I probably shouldn't have been quite as stubborn and stuck on calling, but I was, after Randy talked it up about how much fun it was going to be to have me there to call elk, I felt I had a duty. And after 6 days, finally on the 6th evening, I said, Randy, I give up. I'm going to have to throw in the towel here. I don't know if I can call in an elk. And we called in like 3 elk. One really nice one for him the first night that just hung up at 30 yards behind some brush and didn't get a shot. Another one that came through 2 really nice openings for him, and he just couldn't get it to stop in the openings. It stopped behind a tree and didn't get a shot. So it's not like we didn't hear a bugle or anything, but it was just so incredibly difficult to call elk in that unit last year. So finally on last night I said, I'm open to suggestions. And he's like, well, I've always spot and stalked them before. We just go out to the grassland. You can see for 10 miles, and we find one, watch it bed down, and try to slip in on it. And so we did it, and it worked out.
So there wasn't as many guys out there in the grasslands trying that? There
was nobody out there. No, yeah. I think everyone was looking at it thinking, those aren't elk, those are cattle.
Right, yeah. Wow. So part of the elk tour that you were on, if you will, this 30 days of elk hunting, you got in on some youth hunts. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so we came back from New Mexico, and I'm trying to think date-wise, but we only had 2 days left to hunt. I think it was a Thursday and Friday were the last 2 days of the Idaho season, so the 29th and 30th of September. Hunting late can be difficult. You usually get into some more vocalization, but you also get into elk that are focused entirely on breeding cows, and trying to get them away from the herd can be tough. My son Isaac was 13, and he was absolutely determined to kill an elk with a bow. He had killed 2 bulls previously with a rifle, and both times he said, that was all right, but I want to shoot one with a bow. And so I, again, kind of went into the whole scenario with him. Listen, it's 10% success rates on public land. It's, and that's for everybody. For a 13-year-old kid to go out and only have 2 days to hunt, just be prepared for, not to fill your tag, and we may be rifle hunting again.
Yeah, but
oh no.
What's the success rate evened out with the Corey Jacobsen factor? I'm just curious.
it's probably around 11% by the time you factor in New Mexico for us last year. But no, and that's a great point. You look at it and you see 10% success rates for public land, general season elk hunting. But that doesn't factor in. There's a group of people out there that kill their elk every season that are literally 100%. And you factor that in there, and that's even more daunting for someone their first year going out who's never elk hunted before. It's not truly 10% for their demographics. It's probably 4 to 5%. Which, you start saying that, and pretty soon you start discouraging people. And my goal is certainly not to discourage them, but give them the tools and the resources so that they can not only get to that 10%, but hopefully crush that 10% and be up at 50 or higher percent. But with my son, I was certainly wanting to paint a realistic picture too. And I think, it's tough. They see their parents who grow up elk hunting and have been doing it for years and have a certain level of success. And they kind of expect that. And that's kind of the standards that they set themselves to. And my son is certainly no different. He wants to be successful, and he's driven. He puts in the time. He shoots his bow. He's in good shape. It's kind of funny. He had a football game on Wednesday night, and he had to go to that. And then we were skipping school Thursday and Friday. But he made the game-winning tackle with time expiring to save literally at the goal line. Tackled the guy out of bounds and saved a touchdown. And so his team's all packing him off. So he's on this huge high from that. And I'm trying to beat him up a little, saying, man, we're going up there. We have 2 days. You're going to have to, get in the game here. And, it'll be great. We're going to kill one first day. And, his optimism was certainly, the optimism rate was very high in our truck on the way up there. But we got up there and couldn't find an elk. And it's an area we've hunted a lot. We hunted it last year in archery season, and that's where we called in 6 bulls in a 24-hour period. And he almost, killed his first elk with a bow then. And there were no tracks. There was no sign. They just weren't there. And we relocated a little bit and finally got one to bugle, climbed up on the mountain and sat on it all day, just trying to get it to make a peep, just hoping it would fire off. And finally at about 4 o'clock, it might have been 3 o'clock, I told him, buddy, we've got to go. We've got a day. We've got 3 hunts left. We have to find an elk that's fired up. And we can either stay here and take a chance, or we can drive to where you shot your bull with your rifle last year, which is about a 3-hour drive. And he thought about it for a minute and said, let's relocate and drive. So we went, took camp down, jumped in the truck, and took off. And we had about probably 30 minutes of legal hunting light left, and we were still an hour from the hunting area. And so I told him, hey, we're going to have to just, do a little bit of road bugling here, just hike down the ridge and see if we can get a response. And if nothing, there's one more spot I think we could try. And fortunately, the first spot we pulled off, we hiked down the hill about 200 yards and let out a bugle. And a bull responded, and he didn't even take his bow with him. We were just walking down to try to get a response. And I said, you want to bust down through the canyon and get over on the other side before dark and see if we can do it? And I don't think I even got the full sentence out. And he was at a sprint back to the truck to grab his bow. And
that's awesome.
We had troubles keeping up with him going down the hill, and got down and crossed a river and up the other side. And Donnie was with me and had his Onyx maps pulled up on his phone, and he's like, there's a meadow on the other side of the river down there, and that's about where the bugle was coming from. They're probably at that meadow or heading there. So we took a chance, and we didn't engage the elk anymore going in there, and took us probably 15 or 20 minutes to hike in there. And we couldn't have planned it more perfectly. We got on a little knoll right next to the meadow, let out a cow call, and the bull bugled about 200 yards away. And so we got set up. Isaac moved out front with the camera guy with him. And Donnie kind of stayed there where he could see the meadow and glass a little bit. And I moved about 60 yards behind Isaac and started calling. As soon as I did, I could see cows running into the meadow. And, the bull came out, and he had a tremendous bugle. This sounded like a big, mature bull. But as he came out, I looked through my binoculars, and it looked like he was a spike and maybe a 4-point on one side, just looked kind of goofy. And I'm thinking, all right, it's a little bull. He's just got a big bugle. And so anyways, worked the calls back and forth and cut him off, and he turned and started circling around, and he was kind of going down to get so he'd be below them and get their wind. And so I was moving around back there and raking and trying to pull him in. And all of a sudden I saw the cows take off running, and it was a little bit of chaos. And so I bugled and looked, and the bull's running off, like just at a dead run. And so I bugled again, and he stopped and bugled. And I thought, well, that's, usually when they wind you, they aren't going to bugle again. And certainly when they've been shot, they aren't going to bugle again. And so I'm looking and trying to figure out what's going on with his antlers. And I looked and I thought, wow, he's actually bigger than I thought, but he's still got something goofy going on. And something on his side attracted my gaze. And I look, and there's blood coming out right behind his shoulder. And so watch, and he walks off, and he's acting pretty sick. And so I walk down to Isaac, and I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I don't know, Dad. I got a shot, but I might have shot over him, and I think I might have hit a cow. And, he was just all sorts of uncertain and kind of almost a little sad about the whole thing. And I said, well, buddy, I looked through my binoculars, and there's blood right behind his shoulder. You made a perfect shot. And just his reaction was priceless. You can't explain it. 13-year-old boy, your son got his first shot at a big game animal with a bow and actually made a great shot. And his reaction was just pretty awesome. But it was amazing. The bull did bugle. He was shot behind the shoulder, double lunged, and went out there and stopped and bugled, and ended up only going about 120 yards and dying right there on the edge of the meadow. But that was one of the best elk hunting experiences I've had, just from everything about it. Just the call in, Isaac got down there and started ranging stuff before the bull came out in the meadow. He had ranged a clump of grass at 40 yards, which was his absolute limit for shooting. And the bull circled around him at about 25 yards and got their wind and took off running out there. And Isaac drew back immediately, and the bull stopped at 40 yards at the clump of grass he had ranged. And on film, his shot execution is just absolutely perfect. He doesn't flinch. He follows through. You can track the arrow the entire way, and it hits right behind the shoulder, and the bull runs off. And it was just incredible.
Yeah, that is super cool. That's awesome to have. Just to think of, my son's 5, so I'm like thinking ahead, right? But just to think of your hunt with your son, his first elk, but that is so neat to have that on film and everything too. Obviously the memory is more important than anything, but to be able to literally kind of relive that and watch it is going to be super neat in years to come.
It is. In fact, we got a preview of part of the footage last week. And I'd watched it through the viewfinder type of thing, but I hadn't seen it on a big screen and edited and everything. And I was 60 yards behind, so I didn't get to see anything that was going on, seeing him making sure he was clear behind him so he didn't make noise as he drew, and making sure that he had good footing and that he ranged everything. And just seeing him do all that, it's like, man, they do listen. You wonder sometimes, but seeing him do all that, he gets it. And then to see his reaction, because right when he shot, he was thinking he missed. He didn't know if he hit a cow. It was just, he didn't know. And to see that uncertainty and that excitement and the doubt and everything, they're trying to analyze that as a 13-year-old, it was pretty cool to see. But yeah, then it gave me, I watched it 3 times and I still got goosebumps every time I watched it. And I can't wait to share it with everyone, because it's one of a kind for sure.
Yeah. It
was all filmed on, a Red Epic camera, the same kind of cameras that they used to film, Jurassic Park and Star Wars. And so the footage, the quality of the footage is incredible. And then over the shoulder on a bull in a meadow, it was, it's one of a kind.
So can you spill the beans on what kind of the project is with all this footage that you guys worked on last fall?
I can't yet, but we're close. There will be more details and hopefully a trailer coming out very soon.
Awesome.
But the project's off the charts. I've never worked on anything anywhere even near like it, and there's never really been anything done like it before. So it's definitely make sure you're signed up on the Elk 101 newsletter email list, because we'll be sharing more details soon.
We want to take a minute to thank Hoyt Archery for sponsoring this podcast. One of the things I love most about the Hoyt that I've been shooting the last couple of years is the DFX cam system. And specifically, it's not just the draw cycle or the feel of the cam, although that's great, but the DFX cam system and the way that they've implemented it with the limbs maximizes the effective string angle. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm a bigger guy. I'm about 6'2". I have a 30-inch draw. For me, I have noticed over the years of shooting many, many bows that I like a longer axle-to-axle bow. Really, something in like the 36-inch range is perfect for me, but those longer bows can get kind of cumbersome in the field. Well, the way that the DFX cam works and maximizes the draw angle, it feels more like a 36-inch bow, even though I'm shooting a 34-inch bow. So there's increased accuracy and increased stability, an increase in comfort for me in my head position, and all around it's a great feel. It sounded hokey to me when I first heard about the DFX cam before I shot it, and how that really helped with head position and gave it that longer stabilized feel. But I'll tell you what, after shooting it for 2 years, there's a big increase for me. So it's something to check out. If you're in the market for a new bow, be sure to head over to Hoyt.com and really look at all the technology that they put into their bows. All right, let's get back to the show with Corey. Let's transition. Would love to pick your brain in a few scenarios. So there's, whether you guys are listening to a podcast like this or reading articles on elk101.com or, the vast array of elk hunting knowledge and resources out there. There's so much that guys could look at, could focus on, and get overwhelmed by. So I would love to kind of break out 3 different people, and I'd love to get advice from you on these 3 different people. So number 1, I'd love to get some specific advice, maybe like the top 2 to 3 things for each of these people on a first-time elk hunter. So maybe they've never gone before, maybe they're just interested in elk hunting in the future, maybe they're planning on going this year, so kind of a first-time elk hunter. I'd love to get some advice on somebody who's hunted maybe 2, 3, even 5 times, who hasn't had luck or maybe just kind of killed one elk and wants to keep at it and get more consistent. And then maybe some specific advice for a guy who's hunted a handful of years, maybe killed a few or a handful of elk, but kind of wants to get to that point where they're kind of looking more at age structure, or trophy class, or what have you, and kind of get into that sort of next level of a bull, if you will. So with those 3 scenarios, what are the top, 2 or 3 things that come to mind for each of these guys for you?
And that's awesome how you broke that out, because that's exactly how I break out the exact same thing. When I'm giving details or information, I look at it the same way. Whenever we do a survey through Elk 101 and we're trying to find out, what does this group of elk hunters struggle most with? We break it into those exact 3 categories. And we actually we're working on some free mini courses, so little mini online courses specifically structured on those 3 groups. So that's
and that wasn't planned, so that's pretty cool.
I know, that's great you set it up that way, because that's, we break it out when somebody comes and signs up. We ask them, what's your experience level? They can choose, I've never hunted elk before, but I want to. I've hunted elk before, but I've never been successful. I've hunted elk and been successful, but not consistently successful. So those three groups. So I think, starting at the first one, never hunted elk before, but want to, for someone who's planning their first hunt, there's a couple things. I definitely wouldn't want to bog them down with situational calling, with some of the higher level, detailed, more advanced tactics and information. I think it's important to start out with expectations, which in the University of Elk Hunting online course, Mark, you wrote a lot of that for me and provided a lot of that content from, I believe at the point you wrote it, you had not yet killed an elk. Is that correct?
That is correct. And now
so
I
from
have.
the standpoint of, yeah, exactly. So you see the progression there. But I needed it from the standpoint of someone who is in your shoes at that point. Because for me, having elk hunted for 30 or 35 years, it's really hard to go back and think about setting expectations or planning my very first hunt, what to expect, or, being overwhelmed and coming from the Midwest or the East and coming out to the Rocky Mountains and not even knowing what to expect or where to look for elk, what elevation they're at. So I think for that group, top 2 or 3 things would be setting expectations, realistic expectations and goals. If you're going on your first hunt, you've never been to elk country before, and your goal is to shoot a 350-inch bull with a bow, and you have 4 days to do it, I'm going to tell you right now, your odds are at about 0%. But, if you want to come out and have a chance to harvest any elk, and you aren't picky at all, and you just really want the experience and learning and all that, the adventure is far more successful than the hunt, or far more valuable than the hunt. Then you're going to be 100% successful, and there's things you can do. So I think that expectation is really important. I think the understanding the planning and the budgeting, knowing how many days you should expect, knowing what it's going to cost. And I think a lot of people hold back on going on their first elk hunt because they think they have to go with an outfitter, which that's totally great if you can afford it and that's what you want to do. That definitely shortens the learning curve and hopefully puts you into elk right away. But I think a lot of times folks that haven't been before look at it as, I either have to go with an outfitter, which means I have to pay a lot of money, or I'm not going to be able to go. And there is definitely an opportunity to elk hunt, buy an over-the-counter tag, go elk hunting, have a chance of being successful, and do it on a limited budget. And when I say limited budget, I'm talking saving $100 a month and being able to go within a year. If you save $100 a month for 2 years, definitely, absolutely can go. So I think that understanding, and then just very basic, high-level locating elk. It doesn't do you any good to be a great caller and understand calling tactics, or some of the higher level advanced tactics and strategies don't do you any good if you can't get into elk. So I think the primary thing is just getting an understanding of what elk are doing, where you're going to find elk during the season that you're hunting, what they're going to need. Is it, are they looking for cows during the time you're going to be there, or are they looking more for food, or are they looking for water because it's early season? Just understanding what their needs are and where to find those needs. And understanding kind of their daily habits. So just an overview of elk knowledge and locating elk would probably be where I would focus my efforts in sharing information with someone who's never elk hunted before.
Yeah, and I think that's so consistent with, because I get a ton of emails from guys based on, like my blog in the past and even through the podcast here, of guys who are in the Midwest or out East or just starting. And those are the big things. They think they can't do it because there's too much involved or the cost is too great, which can be daunting, but as you mentioned, is totally possible when you break it down. And then B, so many people, I think, focus on these super nitty-gritty detail aspects of elk hunting. And in the end, none of that's any good if you can't find elk, And so, that's I think, really solid advice on just, understand it's possible. You can do it. Set some expectations and get out there. And then B, focus first and foremost on understanding elk and where to look for them. And then from there, hopefully, along the way, you'll have some knowledge about, okay, elk, now what,
Yep.
But that's
and really
stuff.
It's, the way I broke down the online course, we start at the beginning with planning and then move into scouting and into gear and into physical conditioning, all things that I put into more the preparation phase. And as we get into, in the field, it's more of the performance phase. And I think for someone who's not been elk hunting before, it's way more important to focus on the preparation phase than on the actual performance phase. Because if you spend all of your time, thinking about setting up and calling and scenarios and common challenges and all of that, but you aren't able to find elk, or you aren't able to physically keep up with the demands of hunting at 10,000 feet, in rugged country, then really all that other stuff.
You're packing out on day 2 because your gear's totally insufficient type thing. Yeah.
Totally. Yep. And so I think, focusing on those preparation elements is definitely key, and not getting, like you mentioned earlier, not getting bogged down. There's so much information. I spilled out 30 years of elk hunting experiences in the online course. It's overwhelming if you jump to the back and try to go forward from there. You definitely want to start at the beginning if you've never hunted before and get an understanding and just a basic platform to be able to leverage off of when you start adding some of the other elements to it.
All right, perfect. So let's get to the next proverbial hunter here we're talking about, and I would assume we're going to get a bit into the performance phase now. So it's a guy who's been on a hunt or a few hunts, maybe had 0 success, maybe has killed 1 elk in 5 years, something like that. But this next level they've done the preparation, they've done hands-on and sort of verified their preparation. They're ready physically and with gear and things like that. What are the most important, I guess, lowest hanging fruit ways that these hunters can begin to increase their success rate?
I loved how you put that, the low hanging fruit, because it really is. You've got to take it in the right order. If you're, leaving things hanging right there down low and reaching for the higher stuff, you're missing opportunities, and it'll come. I think it comes, just line upon line. As you learn one phase, it's going to be the platform that allows you to learn the next. And if you skip a phase there, it makes it more difficult. So for that group, as you mentioned, they know what to expect in elk country. They've been there, they've hunted before, they know the budgeting, the planning, all of that's taken care of. So some of those details and the stress and anxiety that comes with that is taken care of. But to get on that I don't know, just that level where you're successful, you can luck into it once in a while, but to really put things together and not to think, I still luck into it on a frequent basis. So don't think that ever goes away.
Yeah. Luck's always a part of it, I think.
Yeah. But to be to a point where you are confident in your abilities to be able to kill an elk, there's a couple higher level preparation things. I think the more physical conditioning that you're able to do, it's going to lend itself toward a higher level of success. I'm not saying you have to run a marathon or spend all week in the gym to be successful, but elk hunting's tough, and the more that you're able to devote to physical conditioning, there's going to be a payoff there. I think elk hunting knowledge, just basic how the elk use their senses to stay alive, understanding that a little bit at a higher level. The wind, I think, is probably the nemesis for most hunters in that group that causes failure more than any other thing, is just the thermals and the wind. And once you get an understanding of that and start playing that, I think your encounters and opportunities go up significantly. So that is going to be one. Paying attention to wind is probably the most critical for every elk hunter, every level. But I think that group that we're talking about right now, they probably aren't paying quite as much attention to it as they should be. So just, those are some performance things. But then as we get into it, or before we get into it, I think scouting is important, and boots on the ground isn't always an option or even necessary, but understanding, maybe Google Earth, what to look for on Google Earth, what kind of areas you've been in the area before, now really dissecting it down and saying, where are the elk going to be feeding? I've been in there. I know there's fresh sign. I see rubs. I know they're rutting in there. And then being able to take it to that next level and say, where are the bedding areas? Where are the feeding areas? Where's water? Where am I going to find them first thing in the morning? Where are they moving to during the day? Coupling that with thermals and what the thermals are doing during those parts of the day is really going to be important, because I think most hunters in this category are probably going to be able to locate elk. They're going to be able to get into an area where there are elk. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to get to the point where they're consistently hunting elk and having encounters with elk. So I think the understanding of what the elk are doing, where they're going, and then using the thermals to be able to get in there more consistently is going to be important. And I think just a basic, my strategy is calling. And so I would definitely, if somebody's hunting September in the rut in this category, I would definitely implement a calling strategy. And it doesn't have to be difficult or advanced. You don't have to be a great caller, but just an understanding of what it takes to call elk in is going to be important. I think it's interesting. I was actually reading an old article this morning that Chuck Adams wrote, and he flat out said in there, you can't call in elk. You can't call in mature bulls. Once an elk gets to its fifth season, your chances of calling that elk in are 0%. And Chuck is an incredible guy and a good friend, but I would disagree on that point, because I just don't want people being discouraged that calling doesn't work anymore, or that calling doesn't work on big bulls. It absolutely does. It just takes a little bit of an understanding of why elk are calling and what it takes to elicit a response out of them. But I would definitely throw calling in there into that group to increase their chances of success.
Yeah, that's great. The point you made about, Google Earth and tying that in so important. So many guys want to understand what to look for in Google Earth, but the specific point I want to reiterate that you said is so valuable is it's not what you're doing like right now, preseason in Google Earth, that's important, although it is. I think getting into Google Earth within like a week or two after your hunts and really piecing together what you experienced on the hunt and then understanding what that looks like from 10,000 feet on Google Earth and seeing, okay, I saw this here, they were doing that there, and piecing together what that looked like from this satellite view is incredibly important, not only to get a better idea of that area, but that helps you as you then go look at new areas to kind of, oh, this looks familiar. Oh, I could see them doing this in this pattern. So it's really kind of that post-hunt debrief in Google Earth that can be incredibly valuable and kind of build upon your knowledge of what to look for in elk country.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you nailed it right there. I think we complicate things. I know we complicate things in a lot of areas in life, but elk hunting especially. And when you really stand back and look at it, yes, elk are smart. Yes, they live in rough country. But at the end of the day, they're an animal that their only instinct is to survive. They are playing their senses, the thermals, the visibility, being able to see and being able to hear. That's what keeps them alive. And when you look at it at that level and simplify it to that point, that all I have to do is overcome their three senses and get close enough to them to be able to get a shot. And when you look at scouting and Google Earth and everything on the same level, elk it's not complicated. When you look at it and you finally get it, and like you said, when you come back and you're like, man, the elk were always right here in the middle of the day and it was impossible to get in on them because of the wind. There's a reason for that. The elk know that. It's a safe haven for them. And when you look on Google Earth and you're able to see, okay, it's on a north-facing slope. There's a bench here. I was trying to approach them from above, and it was wide open shale rock. There's no way I could do it. I was making noise. They could see me. I couldn't approach from below because of the thermals. Then you all of a sudden recognize, wow, there's a little draw over here. I could actually pop up and come in on the same level. And like you said, that after-season debriefing, and during season, take a GPS and plug in, called in an elk right here. The elk were right here in this meadow every morning, whatever it is, and then get back and download those points to Google Earth. And you can triangulate some things really quickly and start to see the big picture pretty clearly.
Awesome. So what about someone who wants to increase quality, whether that's, trophy or just age class or kind of get to that next level? They've had some success, but want to kind of take that to the next level again. Kind of, I know we're getting more advanced, but still, I think there's some low-hanging fruit or some specific things that make the most difference. What stands out to you in that scenario?
You're speaking directly to me, Corey.
Whatever. No, and I won't go into the trophy part of it. We can maybe touch on that afterwards if we want to. But for me, I love the vocal interaction. I love the calling and the trophy aspect. Don't get me wrong. I love a big bull as much as anyone, but that's not my focus. I would much rather call in a 5-point that is screaming and slobbering and eyes rolled back and thrashing trees and just thinks he's the king of the mountain. I would rather call him in and shoot him and consider that a success over what I did in New Mexico last year, spotting and stalking and shooting a nice 6-point. For me, just that adrenaline rush, the excitement, the adventure, the calling is what it's about for me. So I won't touch as much on the trophy side of it, and there are definitely things you can do to increase your success if you're looking for a trophy, but I'll focus more on increasing consistency on success. And, you nailed it right there. There's low-hanging fruit, and you see I come in contact with so many individuals who are in that exact boat, that they've hunted for 5 to 8 years. They've killed 2 to 3 elk. They kill an elk every 2 or 3 years, but they aren't getting it done every season. And honestly, I think it really comes down to stepping back, and kind of seeing the whole picture. Not getting so focused on calling or on physical conditioning or one area, but kind of looking at the whole picture and getting an understanding. One thing they'll say right off, if you're an archery hunter, the setup is probably the most critical point that takes people from inconsistent success to consistent success. And that is setting up in an area
where not only you're going to have clear shooting lanes and be able to get a shot, but where the elk is going to feel more comfortable to come into that shooting lane. And so then you start talking about things like having a partner to, a caller shooter, 2-person setup, setting up in front of trees or in front of rocks instead of behind them, setting up where there's a path of least resistance, where a bull is on the same level. You're on the same level as a bull for several reasons, so that the thermals don't switch 180 degrees and blow him out when you're below him, and so that the bull can't get to a high vantage point and look down on you and stand there and basically hang up like they do. So some of those little details that all really center around the setup are really the key that I would focus on. And then increasing that knowledge, scouting, having backup areas, what the elk in each of those areas are doing at different times of the day, and maybe a couple more tricks up your sleeve when it comes to calling. Definitely adding raking to calling is a huge benefit that'll break bulls loose. I'm trying to think if there's other, but that's definitely what I see when people go from that inconsistent success to consistent success. It definitely takes a higher level of attention to the setup and to just having more encounters, which really comes down to having backup areas and not getting stuck in one area if the elk aren't calling.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Perfect. So let's transition a bit and talk about something that we've mentioned in passing, and that's, the University of Elk Hunting. Not only is it helpful because if you're one of these 3 guys that we talked about at these 3 stages of elk hunting, there really is kind of, I think, something in there for everybody. But, take us through it, Corey. I just pull up the site here and I'm seeing like 193 reviews pretty much as I'm scrolling through them. They're all 5 stars. So first, give listeners context for what this is, how it works, maybe what some of the feedback's been from the past year of really rolling this out, and then where things are headed, because I know that you have some kind of new exciting changes and additions for it.
Definitely. No, and I love elk hunting. I love sharing elk hunting knowledge. This isn't like a silver bullet. Here's the one secret tactic that'll get you an elk every year. This is 30 years of elk hunting experience, literally boiled down into an online course, and it's 120,000 words long, and it will be expanding this year. I'll get into a little more on that in a minute. But there's over 70 videos on there, 70 video components, everything from scouting with Google Earth. I sit down and go through scouting a new area and literally walk through everything I look for, point out areas. It's 30 minutes of me sitting at a computer, walking through an area, what to look for, and considering thermals, all of those sort of things. Setups, we go into 20-some minutes on setups and actually stage a setup where an elk comes in and show what not to do, what to do. And so I think the videos have been what most people have said, thanks so much for doing that. The visual illustration has been so helpful. There's just some things you can't put into words and explain in a way that I get it. So that, that part of it, and then diagrams, different things, frontal shot, we dissect all that and look at what the actual thoracic opening is and some of that. But I think at the heart of it, it's basically me wanting others to be successful. And I think in the hunting industry, especially, well, any walk of life, I think there's jealousy and insecurity and everything that comes out, and we want to hold some of that success to ourselves, because if someone else is successful, somehow that dilutes our success. And I don't feel that at all. I think for me, I guess I want to share in that success with others. When somebody sends me an email and says, man, I went through the course and I shot my first elk this year and just wanted to send you a picture, thanks so much for doing what you do. It was like I was there. I get to be a part of that in a tiny little way. And I just love seeing that success in others. So that's really the heart of the online course, is just me being able to share my experiences. And I'm certainly not an expert, and I'm certainly not, the way I elk hunt is not the only way to elk hunt. But if it adds a little bit of a level of success to someone else's hunting, then it's a success for both of us. So yeah, there's 190 some reviews, and honestly, there's another 20 or so that I haven't went and approved yet, that are everything's very positive. I've had a couple people that, send me an email and they're like, we drove out to Colorado from Ohio last year and got out there and didn't hear a single elk bugle in 10 days. And, I don't blame it all on your course, but it sure would have been nice to know what to do in that situation. And, it's like, well, it does go into having backup areas. Did you relocate? No, we kept going to the same place because we were into sign. They just weren't bugling. And so, we definitely cover that in the course. And it's not they're going to be missing elements here and there, I think, within the course. But one of the things that I lack in is my experience in rifle hunting. Late season post-rut rifle hunting, I basically go out and hike with my rifle. And if I hike far enough, I'm going to see an elk. And if you see an elk with a rifle, you shoot it. And it's, I haven't put a whole lot into the strategy of it. And knowing that that's my weakness, I got a hold of Randy Newberg, and he's created an entire module for the online course this year, strictly devoted to postseason and late season hunting. And that's Randy's forte. I mean, that's really where he loves elk hunting and has the experience. So we're doing that to add to the course just to make it that much better and start filling in some of the holes that are there. We're launching next month. We'll be launching an app, a mobile app, so people can download the entire course onto their mobile device and have literally at their fingertips in the field videos and all of the content. So if somebody's on a plane, they can take that and go through it on an iPad or on their iPhone or Android phone. If they're out in the field, they can have the gutless method video downloaded and stand right over their first elk and say, I'm going to watch Corey do the gutless method on an elk and see play by play where I make this cut, what I do here. I'm super excited about that. And just, a lot of other really, really cool things that tie in with the course that are coming out this year.
That's very cool. So I'm sure in the app there's an area where we just play you calling elk since you're a world champion and we are all complete novices and you just draw the bull in, right?
Be sure and check the state regulations about using electronic devices for calling big game. But
well played. That's funny. So this is, you're kind of relaunching things with these new editions and all that as we're going. And literally as we're recording this, I mean, things are kicking off and there's a big promotion going on right now. Kind of give us the heads up on what's going on with that.
Yeah, so we're, we kicked off last year. I was on the podcast with you and we did an introductory rate. The online course is $99, which, a lot of people, I got a few emails initially and they're like, seriously, $99 for an online course to learn how to elk hunt? Do you think I'm crazy? And then you break it down and say, well, you just went and dropped $1,200 on a new bow. You're spending $50 or $60 on elk calls and a couple $100 on boots and, several $100s on a pack. But you don't have, you are the greatest weapon. And that's why I tell people all the time, you are what dictates success. It's not your bow. It's not your boots. It's not your calls. It's you. And the more knowledge you have, the more confidence you're going to have. And I truly think confidence is what creates success. And once you explain it that way, like, yeah, I guess it is worth investing $99 into myself for a lifetime of elk hunting knowledge. And but we had the introductory deal where they could sign up for a significant discount. All of those discounts have gone away just after the first year. We're celebrating our 1 year anniversary right now. So there'll never be more than a $10 discount on the online course. With that being said, we have, the promo code that we've always used with you guys, Mark, is Backcountry. And that code is still active. They can still use that and save $10 when they sign up. But the other really cool thing that's going on right now is we're doing a huge promotion with all of our partners and with Mountain Ops. And for every $5 that somebody spends on Mountain Ops products at mountainops.com, they get one chance in this promotion. But the really cool thing is everyone who signs up for the online course or renews their membership to the online course between now and July 12th gets 50 chances in the promotion. And the promotion is, I can't share all of the details because it's going to be added to every week for the next several weeks. But the baseline of it is an all expense paid elk hunt in Montana. It's a $12,000 elk hunting package, and I will personally be on the elk hunt to call for the winner of the elk hunt.
Yeah, That's amazing. So since the whole electronic calling in the app couldn't happen, you're just going to fly us out there. That's perfect.
That's right. Yep. So there'll be somebody from Mountain Ops, and then the winner of the hunt who will be hunting. It is on a private ranch, which, I had some reservations, and not that I'm a private land snob by any means, but really our platform has always been, public land, over-the-counter, do-it-yourself type stuff. But this opportunity is just way too good to pass up. There's a private ranch that Mountain Ops has access to, 2 spots. It's from September 18th to the 23rd, which if you've looked into the fall equinox and the moon phase for this year, you realize that is absolutely the prime peak rut perfect storm week to hunt elk in 2017. So we'll be on a private ranch that has several thousand elk with bulls screaming their heads off and hunting during the peak rut, hopefully calling in an elk for the winter.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm sure there could be a potential for different legal issues and things like that too, with pulling some kind of promotional and business things off with public land, I'd assume.
It's not the public land side of it, but the outfitting side of it. Definitely, we had to make sure. So there will be a guide. It's being ran through an outfitter and a guide there, just to make sure we have our bases covered on that. And then, just the rest of it's all the details are laid out on Mountain Ops' website, and we're going to be running a whole bunch of promotions and specials and opportunities for people to sign up right now for the online course and get a whole bunch of extra chances to win.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I just can't let this go because I'm sure there's guys who their ears perked up. And this is really covered in the course as well, where you guys could learn more about it. But go ahead and expand a little bit on the dates you mentioned, because I'm sure if guys hear you say it's, prime dates coming up for 2017 to be hunting, that's going to get guys interested. Explain kind of how you look at those dates in terms of, as you mentioned, the equinox and things like that.
Definitely. So, there really is a science, and you hear people talk about full moon. Does it affect elk? Does it not affect elk? Different areas it affects elk differently. It really, New Mexico, Arizona, the full moon, you better pay attention to it because elk act differently there on a full moon than they do in Wyoming or Idaho or Montana. So, it's important to understand that. But in a nutshell, just really high level looking at it, the fall equinox is the day in September when the nighttime hours are equal to the daytime hours. So the amount of light is equal to the amount of darkness. It usually falls September 21st to the 24th, somewhere in there. In 2017, I think it's on September 22nd. The thing that's important about that is the amount of daylight entering a cow elk's pupil is what triggers the estrus cycle. So the fall equinox is really the trigger for the cow's estrus cycle, which is what kicks in breeding and the peak rut. So if you look at the fall equinox on September 22nd, I would say within 3 to 5 days of that date is when the cows are going to start coming into estrus, and the bulls are going to know what that means. They're going to have the cows rounded up and in harems and be ready to breed. I prefer to hunt right before that happens for a couple of reasons. Number one, once a bull has a cow that's in estrus and is ready to be bred, I don't care how good of a caller you are or how intimidating or threatening or anything you are, it's going to be really challenging to call that herd bull away from the cows. So I like to hunt before that when they aren't as focused. They're more into protecting their herd, knowing that the peak rut's going to come in. So knowing when the fall equinox is, I like to time that week before it. The full moon, if I can hunt during a week when there is no moon or when the moon is either waning or waxing, but not in the full moon or even close to the full moon, it's going to be to my benefit. Hunting on a full moon, it adds some elements of difficulty, and the more desert type of a unit that you're hunting, the more difficult it can be. This year, the full moon is on, I believe, September 8th. Which means that the new moon peaks on September 22nd-ish, which also falls in line with the fall equinox. So that week from the 15th to the 22nd, 24th, somewhere in there, if I had to make a prediction, it will be off the charts this year. Wow. So I definitely would want to be in the elk woods from the 15th to the 22nd. So if you're looking at vacation time and dates to take off and have to put that in now, I would say you would be safe anytime from the 10th to the 24th. And again, that 14th to 21st, 15th to 22nd, however it lands for your time off, should be just incredible this year.
Yeah. Dang, it's getting me excited.
I know. It's coming quickly, too. We're looking, a couple months away, and we'll be hearing elk bugling.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So before we let you go, we've covered some great ground, but just real briefly, I've seen that you've been working on an elk call, which, anytime you have somebody with your pedigree actually working on a product and knowing how much value you place on calling, it just gets me super interested. So I know that you've done a ton of prototyping and looking at latexes and variations and kind of went super extensive into this, but give us any context on that. But I would just really love to hear kind of what was your goal in making this call, and then what's kind of gonna make it unique or different, or at least sets it apart from some of the others that are out there that you've used.
For sure. So we developed the All-Star diaphragm. It's been 3 or 4 years ago, and went through quite a bit with it. But really, higher level, I just wanted a call that would do everything. I wanted to make sure that the call would give some soft, sweet cow calls, but also be able to scream a big challenge bugle. I don't want to have to switch back and forth between diaphragms, and never have, and never want to go to that. But that was really my overall goal with that call. And we were able to take the existing latex that my dad had been using with Rocky Mountain hunting calls and really quickly dial in a call that did all that. And it was a great call. It still is a great call. But with this one, I wanted to basically just knock it out of the park. I wanted the best of the best. And I knew that with my engineering background, you can never be satisfied. And so I got a hold of Kurt, who's the general manager for Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls, and just said, hey, I want to do something unique. I want to take a look at a bunch of different latexes. And, not that that's unique, but I want to build calls on every possible platform that we can. So every different frame with every different option for a backing plate, whether it's a metal tab, a plastic dome, all the different frame widths, all of that. And I want to build calls with each of these different latexes. And when you start talking about latexes, they go from 25 thousandths to 55 thousandths in thickness at 5 thousandths intervals. So we've got 6 or 7 different latex thicknesses on these different frames. But then you also can stretch that latex at different tensions. And so we literally went from I don't know what the units are on the tension, but from a reading of 20 to a reading of 55, literally in 2 or 3 increments of measurement. So we're talking hundreds of combinations here. And Kurt made diaphragms for each of those combinations. And I went through them one by one, starting last November-ish, and picked out the top 10 or 12, and then had him build a couple different variations of that, and really just started going through and narrowing it down. And what I was looking for was a call that was super easy to use. I didn't want to have to force it. I wanted to be able to make good sounds easily, authentic sounds. It had to sound good and have the right tone and pitch. But then ultimately, it had to make super sweet cow sounds and still be able to scream a bugle. And we got really close about the time that the World Elk Calling Championships in Salt Lake were in March. And so Dirk and I both took the calls down there and used it, and they performed spot on. There was no doubt that they made good sounds, that the cow sounds were right on, the bugles were right on. But there were still a few things I wanted to tweak. I felt we were a little bit on the side where the latex was stretched a little too lightly, which would lend itself towards wearing out a little faster. And on the same token, with manufacturing, just the tolerances and different things are human. They're handmade. They're made by humans one at a time. So knowing that there's going to be some variation there, I just wanted to make sure we were dialed in. So we're actually still in the final stages of tweaking it. And I'm talking minuscule tweaks, but I want to make sure we just absolutely hit right in the center of perfection with this call. And I'm actually driving up there next week to sit there at the press as we pound out calls and give them a try and make sure that the consistency's there, that everything's there. The other thing that scares me is launching a call like this to the masses and finding out that, maybe there is an issue with the latex. It only lasts 6 months and then it starts falling apart. I've laid them outside. I've laid them in my shed for 3 months and I don't pick them up and they're still dialed in and perfect. So I'm not as concerned about that. But I think our plan at this point is to not do a full launch this summer. We're only going to allow members of the University of Elk Hunting online course to purchase those calls. And that will give me 6 months of user testing in the field and make sure everything's dialed in. And then our official launch to the masses and in retail and everything will come next January.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited, but somewhat surprised to hear that you're focused on making it easy to use. And I don't mean that, with any agenda other than to say being a competition caller, being someone who has vast amounts of experience. I was sort of assuming that this would be like a Ferrari, right? Like it's super high performing, but maybe a bit tough to handle. So it's interesting to hear that it's actually, you're focusing on the usability of it as well. That makes me excited as someone who's not a world champion caller. It makes me excited to get my hands on the call.
And I think to touch on that, I really think that the quality of the call comes from the usability. And I think that if a call is hard to use, it makes it so it doesn't perform as well. And if you're able to just apply the least amount of pressure, both tongue pressure and air pressure, you're going to have more control. And so making it easy to use ultimately makes it higher quality.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Corey,
I'm back on.
Steve's back.
We lost Steve for a little bit there.
Yeah.
Internet went down.
Yeah, he was texting me that he went off. I was going to let him quietly disappear, but we're glad you're back, Steve. You just missed a great conversation about elk calls.
I thought for sure he was out practicing his elk calling.
Lord knows I need to.
Yeah. So with everything going on, I mean, we've covered a lot. What's kind of the best way to stay up to date with everything, whether that's the course or, following the development of the call, anything like that? Is there a central spot we can send folks to?
Yeah, just elk101.com. Go there and just sign up for our email newsletter. We won't spam you with a bunch of unwanted stuff. We send out, updated content. Just on the main site outside of the online course, we still have a ton of content that goes there. We'll send out updates on that. If there's an update on the elk call, if there's an update to the online course, this promotion, that's definitely the central place to go and be a part of it.
Perfect. Corey, thank you so much for joining us. Steve, thanks for joining us for the outro, man. I'm glad you're back.
For rejoining us.
Yeah.
Do what I can.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you guys, and especially if we get to chat elk hunting for a little bit, it doubles the fun.
Yeah. Steve, did you have anything that you wanted to ask about or anything like that?
Oh, I need to pick Corey's brain for like 2 years straight,
hours,
I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
You just let me know when and where, and if it works, to put on a headset and record it for a podcast.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, we need to do an episode where, I can, because I'm definitely that third group of hunters. I consistently kill elk every year, but, I just, it's out of sheer working my ass off for them, and I know that it can be done in a better way. And just the calling scenarios, and we get into bulls all the time where they're, 100 yards out and they hang up, and we sit there and call back and forth, and, I can just never get them to commit. So I don't know if it's all the things you mentioned of setup and strategy and the sounds that you're making, or if I'm just flat out doing something wrong. So
no, and I really just think it's, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you can call in every elk, but I think you're talking about that exact situation where it separates most people from that consistent success to consistent success is just having that last 100 yards, having that one little trick in the bag to be able to break that bull loose. And I really, it gets me excited. I just want to go out and elk hunt right now with you and say, okay, here's the situation. The bull's up there. Let's try this. And
right.
That's
yeah.
Well,
if you'd be up for it, Corey, that would be awesome to get you back on. Maybe if we could eke it out preseason. I know you're so busy as well, but there's a few specific scenarios. It would be kind of fun to do a podcast alone, just on like throwing 3 or 4 scenarios at you and then walking through them in detail would be pretty cool.
Absolutely. I'm game anytime. So just let me know when and where, and I'll make it work.
Awesome. Well, Corey, thanks again.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. Again, if you're interested in this online course that we've discussed, head over to elk101.com and check that out. Be sure as well to use the coupon code BACKCOUNTRY and you will save $10, as well as being entered into the big promotion that they're doing to win a hunt, all expenses paid, in Montana with Corey. I wish I could enter. Anyway, go check that out. It's a great opportunity. I promise you, having looked at last year's version of the University of Elk Hunting course, that it is worth the money. And it sounds like this year it's even better. So be sure to check that out if you're interested and want to grow as an elk hunter. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening. Again, reach out anytime to podcast@exomountaingear.com. And until next time, have a great week.